Oh, okay. Sorry. Jaya's having some audio mic issues. So she is around. We'll see if she'll be able to speak at the end. Enjoy this video. It's the beginnings of some um, research that we're doing within the current iteration, but it's something that Jaya's been looking into for the last 4 years. So enjoy. We'll stick around for the Q&A. Um, Audiability is about 40%, so if you can transcribe the questions, we'll be able to contribute in that way.
Okay, sounds good. We're gonna get started on the video, and there will be a live Q&A that follows.
So, in this talk, which is titled Cryptoeconomics Towards Mass Behavioral Engineering or a Network Commons, I wanted to approach the question of cryptoeconomics from two very different angles. So, one is looking at cryptoeconomics a little bit more practically through a project that myself and Dan Hassan are developing called Cobox, and we're developing that project as part of a collective called the Magma Collective. Which also comprises Moo Devarian, Peg, and Kieran Gibb. And on behalf of all of us, yeah, it's a shame that we can't be there in person to meet you face to face and have these conversations. But both myself and Dan Hassan will be in a live Q&A just after this video. So yeah, stick around. And so one approach to cryptoeconomics more kind of practically, and I would also like to discuss it a little bit more theoretically, which is drawing on work that I've done in a PhD that I completed about 6 months ago. That PhD was a kind of political analysis of major blockchain protocols. And that's where I first started to look at the full political spectrum of people and projects that are kind of involved in forming this new discipline of cryptoeconomics. So I thought I would describe a little bit the kind of the history of cryptoeconomics as a discipline, and some of the political stakes at play there, and some of the kind of political ideas that are being kind of worked on there. Because partially I want to explore whether there is the possibility of opening up a kind of more interesting radical political space in the field, and the reasons of which I will discuss shortly. So the overview of the talk is, I thought I would give a little bit of an introduction to cryptoeconomics initially, and then after that describe some of the kind of questions that we're mulling around in Cobox on this topic of cryptoeconomics, and then basically open it up for discussion after. Cryptoeconomics as a new form of discipline that's emerging is usually traced back to Bitcoin. And some of the easiest ways of describing what cryptoeconomics means really is looking at the Bitcoin mining system, where miners in the Bitcoin network contribute to the network by mining, which serves the purpose of verifying transactions in the network. So it's kind of essential for the functioning of that particular type of protocol design. And they're then rewarded for that work of transaction verification through the creation of new Bitcoin. And the kind of fundamental idea is to create a kind of internal economic system such that behavior that contributes to the functioning and the running of the network is also rewarded within that network. While at the same time making bad behavior or attacks very expensive. Some of these ideas predate Bitcoin somewhat. So the kind of proof of work protocol that is used in Bitcoin comes from a set of ideas that was initially developed to combat spam. And the idea was like, okay, if we put a price on sending emails, then if you send lots and lots of emails, then it can start to get very expensive. And the idea was to set up like different forms of price mechanisms to make spam very expensive, while making emails that are not spam kind of relatively trivial in terms of price. And so what we can see is like the kind of basics of cryptoeconomics is like from a kind of systems engineering perspective, usually, rather than drawing on particularly sophisticated economic ideas. That's changing somewhat, and economists are getting more involved. People coming from a kind of monetary and complementary currency background are getting slightly more involved. But really, it's the use of economic dynamics in a network to achieve certain kind of network security and behavioral effects. That's the kind of fundamentals. And on a very basic level, the idea is to economically incentivize certain behaviors that are considered good, while economically disincentivizing certain behaviors that are considered to be bad for the network. But so I would argue, there's a kind of certain approach to those dynamics that I would argue becomes like more ideological in Bitcoin, and especially also with the introduction of Ethereum, where some of these concepts move from being like, let's say, a bit more like kind of limited to a kind of systems design approach, to expanded as a kind of bit of a political ideology and a kind of general outlook on the world. So like a lot of the work that I've done in my PhD traces how that happened with the introduction of Ethereum as really a kind of second generation cryptographic system or cryptoeconomic system, blockchain system. So with Ethereum, the focus really shifted from developing or from kind of like cryptocurrency development to a kind of blockchain as such, and a kind of generalized platform. And I would say that kind of generalization also kind of generalized the kind of understanding of what this type of system can do, from like, let's say, a certain kind of network architecture to a kind of broader outlook with the ideas that like, oh, this is going to disrupt everything from legal systems to political systems and institutions as we know it. The basic kind of model for that, the basic ingredients of that ideology, let's say, is the idea that decentralized networks will replace authorities, that cryptography will secure those networks, and that economic incentives will ensure that that network operates on the basis of what is considered good behavior. So incentives will also contribute to the behavior of the network. And so there's a certain kind of, I think for a lot of us, there's like some interesting elements to that, okay, decentralized networks replacing authorities and so on. But it's also important to understand the difference between decentralized networks as they're kind of developed in terms of technical systems versus as they're developed as like social and political forms of organizing. And there is a strong tendency in the blockchain world towards technological determinism, and some pretty kind of extreme kind of right-wing and libertarian tendencies, with the idea that really, code, networks, and cryptography can replace a lot of kind of human fallibility. So instead of having a legal system that a kind of, or let's say a political and a legal system that determines kind of laws and that then enforces those laws and so on, that you'd have a kind of code that simply just executes exactly as it's written, and so therefore we can kind of get rid of legal systems and so on, and we've solved the governance problem by ensuring that the network is decentralized and no one has kind of power over the network, let's say. A lot of those things are assumptions, a lot of those things are heavily ideological, and a lot of them don't hold up to be true once they're actually, in actual implementation. And of course, anyone that comes from a background looking at questions of power and politics, there is, the main question that comes up is like, well, if protocols are supposed to replace a lot of political and legal systems as we know them, who gets to write those protocols and how are those protocols governed, and what ideas go into their design. And a lot of this, like which ideas go into their design, is something that is, needs to be traced pretty carefully. There's a lot of like assumptions, economic assumptions and social assumptions that goes into the design of these systems, that really are based on kind of, pretty basic right-wing economic thinking. But that's a whole other talk in itself. What I also wanted to get to here was that actually there was a breadth of people that were interested in Bitcoin as a project. a breadth of people in terms of political backgrounds and reasons for why they found the protocol to be so interesting. I guess what I want to highlight is there are many different approaches to cryptoeconomics. There are many different reasons for why people find cryptoeconomics to be an interesting or important new field. One of which is basically, there's been a kind of experience of open source projects and peer-to-peer networks as being, like in the long term, it's work to run these networks. It's work to keep these code bases alive. And, kind of burnout and lack of long-term sustainability of these projects meant that when the idea of, a kind of internal economy or an internal kind of token system came about, people became quite excited about that. It was, here was a possibility for somehow creating some type of economic sustainability for networks in the long. And so there is, this other approach to the economic ideas, this other approach to the kind of field of cryptoeconomics that isn't about behavioral engineering, that isn't about the kind of wholesale replacement of social and political forms of organizing, but is understood more as kind of supporting decentralized forms of social and political organizing by making networks economically sustainable. And somewhat autonomous from governments and the private sector and corporations. So really on the kind of more interesting end of the political spectrum, or to also place cryptoeconomics in the context of the internet today, cryptoeconomics can be seen as a kind of economic or business model answer to the way the internet operates economically today, which is very much based on surveillance, advertising, and kind of security targeting or intelligence gathering, let's say. And so the idea is that if current day business models or current day internet business models are based on kind of data extractivism, if we're going to try and make that impossible by creating a more privacy-aware internet, then what are the forms of new types of business models that can sustain that kind of network? So cryptoeconomics, in a sense, like on the one hand, the idea is like, well, instead of thinking things through as like normal kind of business cases, let's think them through as a kind of more as a network. And so on the one side, you have people that see cryptoeconomics as the creation of or the formation of new forms of markets that will sustain new internet, privacy-aware internet infrastructures. On the other hand, people, on the other side of the spectrum, people are looking at it more as a kind of commons. So how can we kind of address internet infrastructures and design internet infrastructures in a privacy-aware manner where the kind of economic thinking that sustains it draws more from a kind of commons perspective instead. And so, all these kind of things are in play. But to get to kind of like slightly more gnarly side of the argument, there is the problem that like obviously to create a token is very different than creating an economy. And we see this also in Bitcoin. So, there is this idea, okay, Bitcoin creates like, new kind of economic autonomy and so on and so forth. But actually like at every step of the moment, the Bitcoin, the value of a Bitcoin is completely and absolutely dependent on its interface with other economies. The difference between a token simply and an economy is like a token is just it's a symbol for something. It represents something. But for that token to actually be representing an entire economy, you need the full kind of cycle of production and reproduction happening within the kind of an ecosystem that uses that token. And so that's absolutely not the case for Bitcoin. It's not the case for any cryptocurrency at this point. So what I'm saying is that it's not Bitcoin per se that creates value, but it's interfaces with other economies where value is produced and then exchanged for the Bitcoin token. And so what really matters, but what is often sidelined, is that it's the interface and the nature of that interface between a kind of given token system and other economies that really matters, and that really determines the power of that token, that really determines how it operates. And in the Bitcoin case, it's the interface with exchange rates. Those exchange rates, are they depend on all forms of kind of market manipulation, exchange rate manipulation, and basically like good graphics, scams, and whatever else. And that's the work that goes into enabling or empowering the kind of Bitcoin infrastructure by, bringing attention to it and bringing new investment to it. That investment takes the form of fiat currencies. Those fiat currencies interface with the entire kind of economies in which production and reproduction takes place. And so Bitcoin holders have access to those different forms of economies. It doesn't actually entail a kind of economic space in its own right. This has simply not happened yet. And that's important to keep an eye on because it says a lot about what kind of work needs to go into the project of creating kind of new forms of economic autonomy. And so I would like to suggest that to look at disciplines that really are kind of experts in this field of analyzing areas of productive and reproductive economic activity, let's say, that has been made invisible or that tends to be sidelined. And so, feminist political economy is really an area that I think we can draw from a lot to try and understand some of the dynamics in this space. For several different reasons. First of all, it's a discipline that's very well versed at looking at exactly these processes of work and activity that's being made invisible. So to acknowledge the fact that we don't have, a kind of hermetically sealed economic bubble that we can just fully model and then make it kind of function in some kind of like holistic circular way, but that actually the way that economies function is that they feed off of each other in lots of different ways. And so the productive economy feeds off of the reproductive economy, private sector feeds off of public sector, plus the invisible kind of reproductive spaces. And so it's really understanding the interrelationship between these different economic modes that is very important, and to understand that these economic modes operate very differently. So where you might have a kind of private sector that where kind of profit generation is more important, then you will have a public sector that interfaces with that and enables that and makes that possible, partially by establishing kind of let's say redistributive functions. And I have some anecdotes on that, but I'm not going to go into it. But so my question here is, if we have ways of understanding these diverse economic spaces, let's say, and to kind of begin the work of drawing out the economic spaces that tend to not be represented in these models, we can also start to describe a little bit what are the economic functions that they have that are unique. If we understand the private kind of sphere is generally focused on profit making, public sphere is generally focusing on redistributed functions, and creating a kind of base layer for societies to operate on. What do we understand like kind of commons-based economy to function as? How does it sit in relation to these other spheres? How can we strengthen it in relation to these other spheres? And how does that map onto the specific dynamics that are at play in network technologies? And does cryptoeconomics actually represent a new form of economic sphere, a new form of economic space that runs on a different set of logics? The second reason why I think feminist political economy is a kind of interesting approach is that it's a kind of discipline that's very good at also, let's say both feminist and post-colonial studies, is very good at kind of looking at how these forms of relationships to different spaces are kind of created historically. So, what are the processes through which certain kinds of resources and certain kinds of humans are made into things that can be extracted or things that can be exploited, and look at kind of all the social processes around that. And I think that's also very relevant because we're looking at relationships between different economic modes, and we're looking at the qualities of those relationships. So are those relationships extractive? Are they mutual? Are they collaborative? Are they additive? And how can we engage with that in a strategic way when we're trying to create decentralized network technologies that will have some form of economic sustainability and some form of economic autonomy also. So to wrap up and bring it back down to something a bit more practical, and bring it back to the CoBox project. CoBox is something that we're building in the Magma Collective, and we're building it on the DAT stack. The basic idea is to create a kind of peer-to-peer infrastructure that allows for cooperatives and small groups that don't have a lot of in-house technical capacity to share the kind of load of backing up each other's files, and that the system would eventually feed into a kind of broader infrastructural stack to enable what we are calling a cooperative cloud. So instead of defaulting onto kind of corporate infrastructures because of convenience and because it costs less and so on, to create something that is economically, practically, and on a usability level very easy for small groups to use. And that will also allow them to set various trust settings so that they can share the backup load, but also share files with groups and organizations that they trust in a kind of easy way. So yeah, Cobox, the idea is to enable a peer-to-peer cooperative cloud. And what I wanted to discuss today, what I wanted to put on the table today, is the question of whether such an infrastructure, or to what extent such an infrastructure needs to interface with some of these cryptoeconomic ideas. The kind of assumption or the hypothesis in some of the more interesting people working on cryptoeconomics is that the approach is necessary when dealing with large decentralized peer-to-peer networks, because it allows for some kind of economic sustainability of the network. And so, my question really is tokens and token design the best way to go about doing that? Can we think about the economic autonomy and sustainability of decentralized networks not as a kind of hermetic bubble outside of other modes of production, but sitting in and amongst other modes of production and reproduction, and whether kind of modeling that space will enable us to kind of come up with new and interesting economic models that might draw a little bit on cryptoeconomics, that might, yes, have a kind of internal accounting system for how different nodes are contributing to the network, and yes, try and remunerate those nodes in some kind of a way, but also to understand the way that that network will always and already be interfacing with other forms of economic production and reproduction, and how we can really empower that, and how we can kind of draw in value to peer-to-peer and open source projects with an economic analysis that looks more at the interfaces with existing economic spheres. I hope that doesn't get too abstract. I hope that's kind of a useful and interesting topic for discussion more generally. And I really do think that this is some of the kind of more interesting, like really interesting questions to put on the table at the moment, and really think about how can we move forward with the development of peer-to-peer technologies and open source projects in a way that avoids burnout, in a way that avoids kind of depletion of resources, and that can be a bit more kind of sustainable going forward. So yes, I look forward to discussing more with all of you in a minute.
Yeah, well, we don't need that. Good. Oh, like, Sarah has your Sarah has number one. And then you just leave it and it'll go away. Good.
All right, so we're going to take questions, if there are any. And I'm going to give you a mic, and we're going to type them into the chat, and then Dan will answer. So does anyone have a burning first question? Yes.
So, hello. What happens when a non-cooperative wants to use this stuff? Do you just say, like, no, go away, or do you just let them do whatever?
I can take a stab at that. So in the first instance, given that co-ops is the realm from which we're embedded, it just allows easier prototyping with committed participants. Co-ops are just a subset of wider organizations. So the concept is that along the way, people who aren't co-ops will pick it up, use it within their context, in their realms. There's going to be nothing in the technology which enforces the type of organization you are. So I guess another way of looking at that question is, I wonder if you're asking, will businesses without cooperative values be able to leverage and use the underlying technology or way of working? I guess our thesis is yes, but time will tell. I don't know if I've captured the heart of your question though.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yep.
So kind of a two-part question. The first one, is there like a toolkit within Cobox to like look at how to engineer tokens while you use it, or is it just like a set flow?
Can you repeat the question?
Waiting for a transcription on that one. The audio wasn't too good.
Oh, sorry. Is there kind of like a baked-in token economic system to it, or is it like building blocks by which you would build a token economy in there, or just for Cobox?
Jaya, do you want to grab that one?
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. Is there a token economic system built into it? Right, so we have not decided whether we can have an internal token as part of the Cobox system or not. But I do think that token economics as a kind of possibility opens up a lot of questions, or crypto economics as a possibility opens up a lot of questions around how we want to handle the economics more generally. And I guess part of what I was trying to explain in the talk was that there's lots of different angles you can do that from, by understanding a little bit about, or trying to map a little bit the kind of economic spaces that the box will kind of interact with as a device. And so, you know, it's, I guess, like partially, and I'm a little bit sad that we're not in Toronto, because I think it's an interesting discussion to have, this question of whether something like Cobox does need an internal token or not. And I'm thinking more specifically on kind of situations where, for example, if you have, you know, a radical archive that has lots and lots of images and kind of footage and whatever else of various things which are kind of like heavy files, and they're having that backed up elsewhere, is there the need for, or under what conditions would there be the need for some form of kind of, if not like token and remuneration system, at least something that's a kind of like accounting system that has some overview of where kind of the costs of storage and the costs of kind of upkeep of different backup systems falls, so that there can be some kind of like cooperation on those economic costs. So it's, let's say it's an area that we are interested in Cobox, and it's an area that we're trying to kind of work out, but we're trying to do it kind of very delicately, not kind of jumping straight for a token. We don't think that's necessarily the best way to go about things in all conditions. And it's, you know, the kind of intermediation of kind of token systems changes the nature of relationships, and a lot of those need to be sensitive to the kinds of networks that the box sits within already. So, you know, if you're in a network of trusted organizations that have a kind of principle and set of ethics around sharing resources, that's fine. And then maybe you'd want to have more of a kind of like accounting system just to understand how to kind of make sure that solidarity is kind of taken care of, or cooperation is taken care of in a way that kind of makes sense. But if you're in a kind of network of, let's say, you know, trustless nodes in a sense, then maybe there is, it does make sense to have some kind of like token or some other kind of arrangement. So these are questions that are open questions for us. And really this talk is kind of a first stab of bringing together the practical project of CoBox and some of the kind of research in cryptoeconomics.
Cool, thank you.
The talk is meant as an open question, let's say.
I'll append onto that just a really one way I have of thinking of it is that there are historical tendencies that we can look to which don't have token economics, which show that the capacity to raise consciousness and make things happen without it do exist. An example of which is the long traditions of cooperatives. So if you in particular look at the history of cooperatives in America amongst the African American community, who used those organizing technologies without a lot of resources to begin with because of slavery, banks, insurance companies, mutual aid funds, that type of thing, because the existing racist systems simply would not serve them. That's just one example of how you can dig yourself out of a hole without tokens necessarily. Yeah, so I just want to add that in as in agreement to Jaya. We're not convinced you absolutely need it in all cases. But then on the flip side, given that we're dealing with public-private key cryptography, all peers in the system do have the underlying pipelines upon which you could build tokens. So we're also not building it in a way which excludes that possibility in the future.
It's and sorry, just to add to that a little bit more. Sorry, it's the question of how how do you make kind of efforts and resources that are going into things? How do you make that visible? And tokens is kind of one way to do that, but it's a very sensitive question of whether it's the best way to do that. Sometimes these forms of abstractions create kind of new types of weird relationships that can be kind of more alienating or than anything. Other times they can do the opposite. So it's really kind of to think sensitively about how kind of visibility is kind of created around work and resources that's put into maintaining networks.
Cool. I think that segues into kind of like a second part to my question around, making visible invisible labor, right? So perhaps, say you have some token economy and there is a form or category of labor that's not captured, right? I guess in perhaps like shitstorm cryptocurrency land, sometimes that just results in like a fork, right? And like a whole community moves or whatever. But if there is a system that can like absorb or make visible the invisible, that suggests like the system is kind of self-patching or like taking feedback from the community, right? Now, do you think that there could be forms of labor that are incommensurate or like just not able to be made visible or just are not compatible with like a token economic system? Sorry if that's rambling, I can try to clarify.
Ben, did you get that? Maybe just the last part?
I can answer the question that I think I heard.
Do you think there are forms of labor that cannot be captured by token economics? That's probably the simplest.
Yes.
Perfect. What are they?
Jaya's more in the reads, but I'll just give one that I noticed in Twitter land is even projects which have thoughts. Let's put aside what you think of the specific project. I'm not meaning to kind of do a value judgment at all, but with Zcash, they've got a pretty robust notion of how, is it Zcash with Zuko? Yeah, of how in their system, development is going to be funded internal to that ecosystem. And if you look at actual contributions, so the TLDR of that is some amount of the funds go to an internal foundation, which can then be put towards development, governance, that type of thing. Now, in reality, if you look at then who's actually contributing, who's outside the foundation, oftentimes people who are contributing code or whatever, but don't have access to that internal governance. In particular, I've noticed folks who are kind of gender diverse, trans, neurodiverse, are often told, if you want to contribute, do, but we're not obliged to pay you. Now that's with labor where it should be visible within that system. That's code, it's commits, it's git commits, it's blah. And even that is not being valued. So then of course, when you get into the realm of emotions, like mutual support and all of that, if we can't even capture the stuff that's easy to capture, there's bound to be stuff which you can't, which isn't. Jaya, what do you think?
I just think that it points to really the contradiction between, or the fallacy in assuming that wage or a kind of quantification of labor is kind of somehow rational in any kind of sphere. I mean, it is to some extent arbitrary in a kind of like historical settlement, you know, that is also hugely gendered and racialized and whatever else. So there's never any kind of like rational pricing of things like labor or resources. It's a bit of a kind of abstraction from the beginning, but there are things that can kind of help, because we do live within economies where we do have to pay for things like electricity and new hard drives and whatever else. So some type of visibility around what efforts are going into things might make sense. But there's also, I think, like a lot of the questions or a lot of the interesting stuff around token economics, a lot of the very delicate stuff for me is working out, I guess to some extent, the like how fine-grained you want to go. So exactly because we know that like the pricing is never actually accurate for the amount of like work, the amount of kind of resources or whatever else that goes into any given person's kind of efforts in a space or any given kind of raw material. Given that we know that, like I would argue for kind of more spaciousness rather than more fine-grained aspects of pricing. So instead of like going for, I'm not sure, I might be kind of rambling a little bit here because it's a bit late in my end of the world. But what I'm trying to get at is like, you know, you can try and say like, oh, let's count, you know, every second that someone spends with their child in order to remunerate for childcare. That would be one way to go about doing it, which would then necessitate some kind of weird total surveillance that includes kind of checking your emotional state and your attention span and all this kind of stuff, which is like, you know, pretty insane. But that would be the kind of fine-grained micro way of trying to measure and take into account every bits of effort that goes in that direction. The other way is to give it more space and allow for kind of more trust, which means, you know, going the direction of something like universal basic income, this type of stuff, where it's like, well, we trust that you're doing things that are useful, so therefore here are a bunch of resources to just do a bunch of things that we're assuming are going to be useful. So it's I guess like an argument for a bit of spaciousness in terms of kind of like at least quantification when it comes to trying to use tokens as a way to make visible labor and effort and resources that go into things.
Do we have maybe time for one more question, if there is one? But I'm not seeing any hands, so maybe we'll say thank you so much, Dan and Jaya, for joining us. If it is evening in your time zone, have a good night.
Have a great day, guys. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Thanks.
And thank you.
And we're going to get started right away with our next session, which is about decentralized festivals with Andreas Zialoha. And we're going to get started right away with our next session, which is about decentralized festivals with Andreas Zialoha.
Yep. You are gonna take this? This one. Yep. That one. Pretty well. Do you need audio? No? Okay. You can have an external mic.
External would be nice, I think.
Are you gonna walk around?
Sorry?
Are you gonna walk around?
No, but I might need to turn my head quite often because
All right.
can we move this screen just half a meter to the back? Because I have to.
This way?
Yeah,
Yep.
just a little bit. This
I think so. Be
Sorry.
right
Yeah,
away.
That's possible.
Look at that.
Yeah, do you wanna, is this better? Okay. I'll leave this for you.
Hello. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about.
Currently, we're not getting input on our end.
Whatever I'm gonna say now is actually just a collection what many other people said. I'm part of the Blood 3000 collective, which is quite a large group of people. So all I'm gonna go through is just maybe my collection of what hundreds people said. As I said, I'm part of the Blood 3000 collective. We are a group of people who started something like a magazine in Berlin in 2014. We started like as a circle of musicians, musicologists around the free improvised music scene, like free jazz, noise music. We were a little bit bored of the contemporary music scene, especially the written one. So we started this kind of platform for us to discuss maybe and see what we can do about it. But we also preferred like a more fragmentaric form of publication. So actually the magazine only consists of impulses of fragments. We didn't want people to publish articles like, this is my opinion, this is all, read it. But more like, okay, I have a question, I don't really know, maybe you can help me. So other people could answer in the upcoming issues. We experimented with this. We also said we publish everything. So like people could just write whatever they wanted to write. Wait, let me see if I can. Yeah, this is one of the issues. They're self-made. Let me quickly see if I can figure out how, yeah, this works. Perfect. Yeah, this is Blatt 3000. This is Klaus. He helps us printing it in the basement for very cheap money. This is, yeah, one more issue. Yeah, this is Laura, me, Malte, and Sam are giving a talk. Usually we talk 4 people at the same time. This is us meeting other collectives, discussing things we learned in our magazines, in the things we were doing. This is Konstmusiksista, a feminist separatist composer collective from Sweden. Yeah, this is us working in the living room. Yeah, basically what we do is publish that magazine. At one point, we realized, okay, it's kind of boring to only write and talk. We also want to do things, so we started building our own festival, which was called Verantwortung 3000. Now there's some more pictures. Exactly, Verantwortung 3000. Verantwortung 3000 was like a festival we put up in 2016 on the countryside around Berlin. Once again, we come from a music background, so for us it was first of all just a music festival. We decided that we are not interested in any sort of curation, so we just said this festival is self-curated, everyone can curate the festival themselves. The only thing we are providing is a platform with which people can share resources, use locations, and then program their own events in it. The first software we wrote, like Verantwortung 3000, is just a Ruby on Rails application, quite simple. You could select venues, resources people were bringing, like instruments, and then put up your event. I don't want to go too much into the detail of this platform since there's some duplication with all the other platforms. You will see later what I mean. But basically, yeah, it became this very chaotic, very beautiful 1 week, and we were just like hanging out and yeah, doing various things. Like it was a complete, I don't know how many events happened, like around 100 events of different kinds. We then realized, okay, our magazine is actually becoming more some sort of reflection tool. Like after this festival, we had so many questions in curation, in frameworks, in how we want to deal with frameworks, like the festival as a framework, the university as a framework, the juries as a framework, money as a framework. Like all of these questions suddenly came up because we started to explore these spaces and say, okay, what if we have some sort of experimental setup of reality? Like we put up a festival which is run through that platform, and the platform gives us some strange options. It's more like some sort of game you put yourself in, and it has some strange rules, and you have to deal with this. And it might be a little bit complicated to do it, or to proceed to what you usually want to do, like organize an event. But actually, it also makes you think about reality. And yeah, we had so many questions after that our magazines then actually became more like reflection, like a reflection medium. So we started to just like discuss the festivals in these magazines, and then work on the next festival, which was called Hoffnung 3000. Hoffnung 3000 was quite different. It was in the middle of Berlin. So before Verantwortung 3000, we had it kind of in an isolated experimental environment. We really just put this whole structure into the city. We developed a completely new platform for this. This time it's like a Node.js Express backend with a React front end. I'm going to show it to you. And with this platform, we actually started to experiment with decentralization, not in the technical sense, but in the sense that we said anything can be a venue in the city. You just have a GPS position, this is a venue. And people can mark these places themselves, program events. So the festival happened all around. Actually, people started to use it outside of Berlin. So we had contributions from Sardinia, from Tokyo, from London, also via stream. So people just started to join the platform and contributed their events. This is a press conference we gave on Tempelhofer Feld. Yeah, there's some videos you can watch on YouTube about the festival. This was one of the headquarters where you could get beer and breakfast. There were concerts happening all around, so we had like living situations in living rooms of other people's. So you offered your living room, and then other people programmed events in it, for example. Yeah, this is the platform itself. I give you a quick run through. It's basically consists of two menus. You have the sidebar to the right, the main navigation to the left. What you can already see here is some sort of like activity stream. And it is actually, there you see the activities of some people, like Lost Lobster created a new event, Gestures, Xerophobic, Xanapus updated an event, Convolusive, Clown Anemonfish created a new event, and so on and so on. There's already weird usernames. This is one thing we experimented with. It was anonymity. So we decided it doesn't matter who you are, what sort of career you have, what sort of gender, what sort of skin color. We just want people to collaborate. And you can do this through the platform, but you will never know who this person is, except of when you meet this person. And then on top, your username changes all the time with every resource and every action you did on the platform. So you can't trace people. We have the random meeting feature, like down here you could read random people in a random place at a random time. But basically what you do is you go to their markt and you just put in resources you can bring, and the resource is actually not defined. It can be anything. So people said, okay, I'm gonna bring a PA system. I'm very good in transcribing text, English. I bring a cooking plate, a soldering iron. I'm a saxophone player, a cellist. I have some speakers. I bring I can make a DJ set, music stands, whatsoever. Or I'm really good at searching things in Japanese on the internet. Okay, then there's places. Yeah. So everyone can just create a place. I can click on create place, select some pictures, describe what is going on there. And I can just say, okay, it's a GPS position. So I just mark on the map, like where is that place? It's loading right now, the map. Yeah, so we can just say, okay, here's a place. Yeah, let's just put it here or here or here or somewhere else in the world. This is Berlin right now, so yeah. But yeah, we can have a place here or here. Can put in a regular address, or this is quite interesting also for the upcoming platform, it can be a virtual place. So something which just happens in your head. There's also like some convenience features, like is it a public or private event? So you just want to do something internally, or is it, you can also define the slot size. So you can say this is actually a space with a slot size of 14 hours and 25 minutes. This only gives you 4 slots over the festival time, which means, okay, this already defines upon the politics of that space. Is it an exhibition place? You want to build up an exhibition within 24 hours, or is it something where you only can book a slot of 10 minutes? This already defines a little bit upon what's going on in that place. Here I can just select, okay, don't use these slots because I'm not home. So you can also disable slots. Yeah, and then you just create an event. So you go on the calendar. This is like, these are all things which happened then during the time. Yeah, people were creating their events. I can create my own now. Upload images, give it a title. Where does it take place? I select my place. Okay. Here in the sports park. Select the time slot. Yeah. Like 5 in the morning. Is it public? Is it private? Which resources do I need? Okay, I need the disposable camera and myself, you. Someone created a resource called you. Okay, I want to have that. And then save event, and then it's created. All the people who own these resources get a message now by an animal, and this is like then solved through a conversation with these people. Like, where can I pick it up? When can I meet you to pick it up? When can I come to your apartment or to your place? Okay, this is Hoffnung 3000. It's we've written something like a manual. You can install it for your own festivals. It's all on GitHub as well. There's actually collectives using it now in London, like Anti-University. They're working on changing to Hoffnung 3000 as their platform. Exactly, and so I've written like this handbook, how to use the platform and how to install it. It's actually a one-click install on Heroku, or if you want to put it up yourself manually, there's also like a little manual. Okay, so this is Hoffnung 3000. We experimented there already with decentralization in this sense. Anonymity in some other sense. Technically, that's all not true. Philosophically, it was, and it was quite interesting. So this again resulted in lots of Blood 3000 issues, discussing, us meeting collectives, other people. We also started to realize, okay, this is not only a music festival anymore. We're actually talking about like, we actually want to talk to people who come from more activist backgrounds, from more like philosophical backgrounds, from different sorts of areas which are actually also very interested in decentralization and self-organization, in anarchy, in all different sorts of organizing and giving space for chaos, for plurality, for diversity. So yeah, I wanted to read from our because now Blood 3000 actually transitioned to an association in Berlin, the Lebe Chaos Verein, which is kind of connected to what I just said. It's an association now consisting of a wider group of people from very different backgrounds, from art background, from performance art background, from programming backgrounds. So actually what we want to do is like extend this whole thing into a more, much more diverse form, not only focusing on music. I wanted to read something out of the Constitution, but I think there's not so much time maybe. But yeah, let me just go to Panda, Peer-to-Panda. Peer-to-Panda itself is a new protocol we're developing on top of the Scuttlebutt, secure Scuttlebutt stack. It is something in our minds since already 2 years, and also based on all these platforms we already built before. It comes basically from our tendency to decentralize things. We realized, okay, there's actually these protocols, and they might help us in achieving that, not only in a technical way, but also there is some side effects or features in this which might actually affect our thinking, our way of organizing, our arts, the things we're going to produce there. So there's been some meetings in the last weeks, in the last months, where we discussed this thing and asked ourselves, what do we find interesting in this? What would we like to have? This is always how we start building these platforms. Okay, so Peer-to-Panda. Yeah, this is so far how you write it. Okay. First of all, I will talk a little bit about peer-to-peer technology. I know there's many experts here, probably know about it much more than me, but I will still talk a little bit about it. I hope it's not boring. But basically, peer-to-peer works just by generating a cryptographic key pair, and this is enough to identify you with whatever you're going to say in the future. This is quite interesting. So in the moment I open my laptop and I open the Peer-to-Panda page, yeah, let's say it like that, I generate that key pair, and now this is me. That's already quite interesting if you think about the anonymous animal avatars we had before. Like, who are you? It doesn't matter. It's not really important. Like, let's just be a key pair, and then you can interact with that universe. So all of these like circles are users or key pairs or whatever right now. That's quite interesting, because now suddenly it's just not only a user, it can also be a collective sharing a key pair, or like any group of people, or maybe a bot, like some sort of actually computer program. Yeah. So these are all now actors within the Peer-to-Panda universe. That's already quite interesting. What we're going to use is related to the secure Scuttlebutt stack, which you probably heard in other peer-to-peer protocols as well, as the append-only lock. So people just broadcast what they want to do. Yeah, they just say, okay, I want to create a resource. So this is a message you append to your lock. Yeah, and the lock you only have for yourself. This is something you just maintain on your computer, or yeah, wherever your key pair is able to sign this sort of message. So I just have this append only lock. I just say I create this resource, and you already hear it in the name. It's append only. So I just add messages on top of each other. Yeah. So I just add messages on top of messages on top of messages. Everyone for themselves, and that's already quite beautiful because. Think about it, and that's actually a picture from CFT, from a professor from Basel, which I found very nice. You have to think about it as some water, and you just throw a stone into that water, and it causes some waves. Yeah. Now you can think of every user as one of these stones falling into the water, and the waves just spreading out. Yeah. This is broadcasting. It's like the wave will just spread out, and it will eventually hit some other users, some other devices. Yeah, so think about it as some sort of sea of just like water waves, and eventually they will hit each other. That's also quite beautiful. There's no server involved saying like, no, this is not valid content, this is not okay. It's just like everyone says whatever they want to say, and eventually it will hit other people. Yeah, okay, so this is like append only locks in themselves, already quite interesting, philosophically speaking. Okay, now we have to make sure that we can read each other's append-only logs. So we are right now all around the world. Like these append-only logs, they're somewhere stored on our computers, yeah? You see them here. We're gonna add some messages to them, yeah? They grow, they grow, they grow. Now we also need to do something like replication. We have to share these append-only logs with each other. So there's another protocol which does that, like sharing these logs. So, you know, so we have like all of these logs from different people now, and we can send them to each other and see what they said. That's also interesting because this means, depending on your internet connection, who was online when, and so on, everyone sees a little bit of a different festival maybe, yeah? So if you go back to our festival setting and people broadcasting their messages, you might not see that because this person is offline right now and is not able to send you what this person just said. So depending where you are in the world and how you interact with the platform, everyone has a completely different view on that festival. That's quite radical. So you can already see where I'm going. This is not a festival for, you know, it's not a big rock festival for 200,000 people we're talking about. This is really something else. So yeah, what is a festival where everyone sees something completely different? The data types we are using are also very generic and quite simple. We have the users or the key pairs I just talked about. We have resources. This is similar to 12.3000. Yeah, the PA system I brought, like my skill to play saxophone or whatsoever. These are all resources people created. Yeah, the pink resource is was created by the pink user. This we can verify through this generated key pair. And then I create events, and an event is nothing but a set of resources. Yeah, so this event requests 2 resources right now, and a resource can also be a location, for example, a venue, a place somewhere in the world, a GPS position. Yeah, yeah. So people create their events and claiming resources. And there's some sort of resource allocation strategy happening, so you can't allocate a resource when it's already been used at the same time by someone else. I'm going to talk about how this works. That's one way to see this graph, actually. I talked to some people, and they were very right about saying, okay, user, resource, event, this sounds horrible. Like, you need a different semantics for this. This is too already predefining what it is. So I actually searching right now. I've been thinking about this for some days. I can't come up with any better words. There will be better words, but it's like start already thinking about it. What is a resource? Yeah, a resource can be. I mean, I made a little bit of a list here. Like what could it be? It could be like a 3D position in a 3D space. Yeah, you can say, okay, a resource is a location somewhere in a computer game. Let's meet all there. I have a sound installation here tonight. Or a resource can be money. Yeah, I mean, you could think about a festival which has some money pool, and people claim these resources to realize their events. So resources can also be very abstract things. Yeah, like doesn't have to be. It can be a link to the DOT, so some sort of DOT page or some DOT resource. Or so it's quite hard to define resource really. It can also be people or like. So you see, it's a problematic word. And also an event. What is an event? Like maybe you have an event which lasts over 5 years, or you want to run a festival over 10 years. Huh? Okay, so this is you see, this is work in progress. This is not really well defined yet, but you see the possibilities of this sort of setup. This also is related to the clients themselves. Since peer-to-panda is only defined by that protocol and by these data types, you can build whatever sort of client on top of that. Yeah, for our setting, it's quite straightforward. It's like Hoffnung 3000 interface on top of peer-to-panda. You can imagine how this will look like. You create resources, you create events, you have a calendar. Okay, this is quite straightforward. We thought about some user experience and interface parts since we moved this now into a peer-to-peer world. And we will definitely have people using this which don't know anything about the technical background, and that's also not important. We still want to give them some sort of feedback, like, okay, this is different than what you're used to. You have to behave a little bit differently. And one thing we thought about was maybe, okay, we have some sort of replication health state indicator. Yeah, it's like, how well am I replicating my append-only log with others right now? How much do I help spreading what I just said? Yeah, this is some sort of indicator maybe. Okay, how safe is it that my message is somewhere out there? Maybe the last activity of the person doing something, is it like 1 year ago, maybe I shouldn't go to that event? Is it like, and then also the most important thing is, since an event is just a set of resources, and people confirm, this I forgot to say, we go to this later, but people confirm if someone can get this resource or not. You can also just directly indicate it publicly and say, okay, this event claimed 3 resources and 2 of them got already confirmed. This gives you some sort of safety if the event will actually happen or will be realizable. Yeah, so you can imagine you open this thing and someone requested my favorite book for the Panda party, and you can just say, okay, you can get it or you can't. You can also think about other clients, for example, like some sort of more professional client for collectives, yeah, which have I don't know, like 20 PA systems, yeah, like some sort of like, there's like a big event, they have like lots of gear. They might need more like a dashboard kind of interface to organize all of these resources, seeing where they are right now, in what state are they, yeah, like you can somehow think about that. What I find the most interesting, and it's actually also part and of the peer-to-panda protocol, it will be, is some sort of API to accept or reject resource requests. This is quite interesting, and this is also where you can do many great things. So in the moment you get this request, it's up to you how you're going to confirm it. You can do something very simple like first come, first serve. Yeah, that's can automatically just happen. Like the program itself checks, okay, is the resource free? Yes, give it to that person, otherwise you don't. You can have something like randomness, yeah? Decide randomly if you want to give it to that person or not. You can also have other things like play that computer game first, watch that movie first, and we're gonna give you the resource. Please send me your favorite poem. Or you have an AI deciding if you get the resource or not based on whatever sort of data it learned on before. Yeah, so you can have some kind of fun festival setting suddenly, where actually people join in with different sorts of clients, different sorts of authorization logics. Yeah? So I mean, if you want to have a very traditional festival setting, you can say, I have a festival ticket, this is a festival resource, you have to pay for it, and then I accept it, you know. I don't know, that's quite boring, but if you want to do that. Um, yeah, so you can see there is some things. Yeah, you can also replace this user again with some sort of bot. So you can also have like artificial agents on the peer-to-panda protocol. You know, like some entity creating resources, creating events. You could think of a bot which scrapes events from Facebook and remixes them and just spawns them into peer-to-panda. Yes? And then maybe you get requested suddenly and said, okay, you have to be part of that event. I don't know, make a manifestation based on all the things we found on Facebook on this event in this location. Or use completely other platforms like Reddit or some RSS feeds and feed that then into feed this in as some sort of event data. Yeah. Like someone said, this is actually like true decentralization maybe, because then you really leave your protocol and start just taking data from completely different protocols. I find that quite interesting. Yeah, for the festival itself, I mean, we have some ideas on how we want to use this, or like how one could work with peer-to-panda. One is like to hijack festivals, for example. Since it runs just in your browser, you open it, you have peer-to-panda, you just generated your key pair, you find other peers around you. You could enter an actual festival and start running your own festival within it. There are already venues, there are already resources you can use in some way. So it can be quite a fun game to hijack festivals with peer-to-panda. Another thing is, which I also find interesting, since it just runs all the time and there's peers who can pop up from all around the world, you can also have some sort of call for festivals or a call for collectives, not a call for individuals, but actually say, we want to call for any sort of group who wants to do something on peer-to-panda, like some sort of like a universe they want to start with their own clients, their own approach to how to resources, to like to authorizing these resources, and maybe just define a time spot in the year and just say, okay, this is the week, and we're all going to start using this now. With Blood 3000, like Sam said it quite nicely. It's constant belonging, sudden bursts. Yeah. What are sudden bursts? Like constant belonging is maybe the protocol, but the sudden bursts are all these events happening all around the world based on this protocol. So yeah, what is a festival? It could actually happen all the time. Yeah, or make a call for AI curators, like ask teams to contribute maybe some sort of logic which autonomously curates a festival. That's also maybe interesting. And also what I like is like you get surprised. It's not closed. Like what happened with Hafnon 3000, people from Japan that suddenly made a performance and streamed it to us. Like these things are very beautiful, I find. To not have a curation, to not have some sort of border deciding you're part of the festival or not. Also that it's quite a radical indifference between who is a participant, who is a visitor. I mean, if I want to see the calendar of the festival, I'm automatically already a participant because I generated my key pair. So I could actually also start creating an event if I want to. I can also just look at the calendar. That's also fine. Yeah, and of course it gives interesting features for archiving festivals, for documenting festivals. You can think about a client which gathers all of this data and then generates a fanzine out of it automatically, or you know, like some or like it's already stored on your computer. So when the festival is over, you close your laptop, and you have it on your laptop, and you can use that data then to do something out of this. So it's also interesting for archiving. Yeah. But I think generally, also maybe to close this, I think. What I find the most interesting is this is not made for big festivals. This is really like, this is for your local group, experimenting with different forms of organizing, with trying things out, with building fun things to learn about what does it mean to decide upon certain aspects of the frameworks we're surrounded with. What does it mean if we can hack these frameworks while we are running the festival? what does it mean to define these logics while the festival is running? And that's cool. Like this is the most important thing, to be together, to be surrounded by your best friends, and put yourself into these situations and learn from each other and talk to each other. But still, you can have other groups doing it somewhere in the world and exchange. So it's not really only local, but it is kind of a small first, local first, offline first idea, which I find quite beautiful and also important. Yeah, so this is Peer-to-Panda for now. I mean, there is a repository about this as well on GitHub. It's the design document with many aspects I was just talking about. There's also a Nextcloud instance of the association I was just talking about, where we uploaded all the meeting protocols and idea documents and so on, partly of what I just talked about. I will share this soon, also in the repository. I think there's an issue where I already posted the link, but yeah, so thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So we have about 10 minutes for questions, if there are any for Andreas. Does anyone have a burning first question?
In the case of the festival specifically, given that all users are anonymous, although obviously people are meeting up, but how is there any way to protect against either malicious usage of the system, like people creating resources that they don't intend to provide, or locations that they, are not accessible really, and in addition, like just malicious usage in real life of like people showing up to a place and not being respectful of the location?
Yeah. I have a very boring answer to this, which is, I mean, the systems we provided before also didn't really prevent malicious behavior, but we also haven't had it. I think this is also what I mean. I think we're taking some freedom in not being a company which needs to provide some regulations or some sort of safety things. This is an art project, and we're doing it anyways. And actually, technology doesn't save you from, or like this is what we learned. Like the technology doesn't make it a better festival or a better setup. It's one way to think about it, but what's more important is everything around it. Like how do you announce these things? How do you what sort of instances do you have physically, like in place, people you can talk to, people which care about other people, like all of these things, they're much more important than the actual technological part of it. That's at least what our experience was in the past. And this led to the festival itself kind of being a place which felt safe. But I know that this is not a good technical answer. The problem you have actually also in other protocols like Scuttlebutt in general, there's not, there can be malicious behavior. It just, right now it's just solved by ignoring these peers and just saying like, I don't replicate the data with you. You seem to have some sort of malicious behavior. But it's not I don't think it's a very good solution so far. But yeah, I know it's an important question, but somehow right now we're taking the very naive approach of just solving it outside of the technology. Yeah. Because otherwise we would need to deal with, I don't know, blockchain or something, and I don't want to do that.
Are there any further questions? Yeah?
It's not a question. It's not a question actually, but a proposal. Because you were talking about the terminology that you use, that you should somehow change it. I have a proposal. So you should change resource. If you combine it with availability, you could name it enabler. So in this case, someone who gives a resource is a resource provider, whereas someone who offers an enabler becomes kind of an active participant also in the event. So it's interesting to see it this way.
Yeah, I write it down.
And a question from,
I really liked a bit of that provocation at the beginning that you raised of what is a festival as a framework. And it seems like in this latest iteration, Peter Panda, there's sort of a way that you might be dissolving it. Because I could sort of see the durational part of having a festival, that and it bleeding into real life. And I think there's maybe a way to play with that. But I wonder if you could see that making things harder. I guess I'm not sure. I think sometimes it's special when you bring together people for a set amount of time together. I say this having just tried to organize a conference that you're all at. And I wonder what happens if you lose that, or if you can play with that, because it seems something is interesting there.
I mean, what I just talked about was quite technical, and also, I mean, we're not very many programmers. I'm one, and there's two more, but 90% are people who are not very technical, but they are very interested in exactly these questions of like their curation, togetherness, how you save spaces, all of these things, how we want to announce things. So yeah, the discourse is actually happening on many levels. I had a relatively technical introduction now into Peer-to-Panda, but if another person would stand here, this person would maybe only talk about how do we want to announce this, how do we want to provide a beautiful place and beautiful places where we can work on this. Yeah, and I think this is still happening, like with whatever protocol we're going to use in the end, and this also will lead to at least the local groups meeting and being together and working together on running that festival. Yeah.
Yep.
Are there facilities for asking for help or like encouraging collaboration between people?
Yeah, that's a good question. Definitely. So I'm quite new in the peer-to-peer sphere. Like maybe a year ago I started. So I'm not very well experienced. I'm starting to look into the Scuttlebutt protocol right now. I have help from, or we have help from people, also from the Scuttlebutt community. And right now, concretely speaking, we're 3 developers, all based in Berlin. And we're planning on running a festival next year. So until then, we want to have something like which we can work with already. And if not, then at least there will be something small we want to experiment with, and then run a bigger thing like the year after. Yeah, but definitely, I mean, this is also. I try to learn right now about what is a good, healthy way to publicly work on open source. I mean, everything I do is open source, but I never done something in this size, maybe. So I'm quite happy to hear about people's experiences. What sort of structure is like best practice for these things. I try to learn from the DAT community actually. I like how they share their meeting protocols and these sort of things. Yeah, but generally, definitely any help is very much appreciated.
We have maybe time for one more question, if there is one. All right, in that case, I set you free.